And we are back on the air. This is Collexit Radio once again, Collexit Radio Mach 2.0 with Hannah Miyamoto again. Thanks for listening again, everyone. And I wanted to tell you that women hold up half the sky. That's the title of this particular show this afternoon. And Hannah Miyamoto is going to tell you exactly why and how women hold up half the sky. Go ahead, Hannah.
Oh, hi there, everybody out there in free California land. Yeah, as we broadcast today, this is October 2nd, 2018. Really an important date. Important to mention that because, of course, as we speak, there's a great controversy over the nomination and potential confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the U.S. Supreme Court. But yeah, I specifically asked to be called California Women Holding Up Half the Sky because California women play a really, unique role, and I would argue unique role in the sense of a greater role than the history of they play in the history of other states, especially out east. There's a lot of stereotypes, but it's interesting how you can find, like I said, really historic women all through, studied through California history, and of course women's causes.
Absolutely.
Because, for instance, California was the first big state to give women the vote.
Absolutely.
In 1911, 9 years before the United States of America did the constitutional amendment.
And it was all women that made that happen via the suffragette.
Women and men. I only emphasize that the women's suffrage campaign was something that's really about men because, after all, women had exactly 0 votes before they got the vote.
Exactly.
And we don't forget that.
Fight for that.
Also, young women. I'm talking about. I was looking at just to give one example. There's just so many examples we could talk about. But it has to do with in the early days, 19th century. What I'm talking about. I think we should remember is that because women were, of course, relatively rare. In some places in the country, some parts of California, like mining camps and things, women were totally. There were just vastly more males than females. Mm-hmm. Virtually no children. Mm-hmm. But for instance, I actually discovered, and I think we're discovering. One day I would give a plug here right now to the Women's Museum of California. If you ever get down to San Diego, I highly suggest that you visit the Women's Museum of California and become a member of the organization as well. But at least come down there and see their exhibits. It's part of the. It's called Liberty Station, which is kind of it's a converted United States Navy base, of course, right, in San Diego. But Liberty Station includes the Women's Museum, and they have several exhibits constantly rotating. Mm-hmm. So be sure to check that out down in San Diego. But as far as as an example, I was discovering just a couple of days ago in my history. So maybe I'm going to sound like a complete novice here, but have you ever heard of a woman named Bernarda Ruiz de Rodriguez?
No, I haven't.
Well, she was a really interesting woman who I'm looking right now. There's a Wikipedia entry. I'm getting the impression she's just been recently discovered, like last year. Because what people discovered after reading was that she helped persuade and create the peace that ended the war in the between Californios and United States government troops in 1847. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Specifically, I'm looking right now. I'm just going to read off the Wikipedia page, which, of course, has been cited. She was born 1880, lived until 1802. She was born 1802. She was born in Santa Barbara. She's basically a woman of Santa Barbara, California. And Lieutenant Colonel Fremont, along with his troops during the war, just happened to be based in Santa Barbara. Mm-hmm. And she had 4 sons fighting the Americans at that time. And also she realized that there was no real way that Californians were going to defeat the United States military, because you had both U.S. Army troops and U.S. Navy soldiers running all over California, especially Southern California. But the trouble was, U.S. Army, the official U.S. military commanders basically wanted to, at least they talked about it, they basically wanted to like hang every Californio in California for, resisting the United States government, even though these people were, of course, defending their homes. And John C. Fremont, say what you will about him, I mean, certainly was not a great Civil War commander. That's another story, but that's a whole other story. But say whatever you want about John C. Fremont, he at least understood that these people were fighting for their, for defending what they considered their own homes. They didn't ask the United States of America to invade their country. And he also realized that there would be, if they didn't settle on good terms, this war could just go on literally forever. Because, while American soldiers were numerous and well armed, especially when it comes to cannon, kind of a little bit like America learned in Vietnam, you just cannot just keep, unless you're prepared to quite literally massacre everybody in sight, you just can't change their minds about something like, we'd like to come into your country and take it over.
Right.
Hope you don't mind. Please step aside. No. So anyways, so specifically, the quote generous peace included a pardon of Governor Pico, release of all prisoners, equal rights for all Californians, respect for property rights, including, as we all know, we're all probably living on, if you go back, you'll probably find, I know you will find, a Spanish land grant or a Mexican land grant in your title. Literally anywhere you live in California.
Absolutely.
I mean, except maybe extreme north.
Right.
But anywhere I live in Southern California, you can be darn sure, and also all through the Bay. And of course, the water rights. So in other words, she was wise enough to realize that a treaty that preserved the outlines of the old Mexican rules and society would be the only one that was going to be successful. And that's why, and so in a way, while it's true there was only the war between the United States and California has lasted all of 7 months, it could have lasted a lot longer if it wasn't for Bernanda Ruiz. Bernanda Ruiz de Rodriguez, as her name was. But I don't even know. It would be interesting to know anything about her, if she's just been discovered recently. If those people don't know this, if you go to the Universal City Metro train stop, subway, and you come out of that station, literally next to the subway station is the site where the treaty that ended let's call it the California War, was signed. And Bernanda was actually there. She was apparently the only woman in the room, with John C. Fremont on one side and Governor Pico on the other. And I think, by the way, if anybody ever thinks to themselves that the Mexican heritage of California was ignored, I do suggest to take a good look at a California street map. And you will notice that there are a lot of Mexican names. And Pico Boulevard, right? It extends from downtown all the way to Santa Monica, I believe, all the way to the coast. It's one of the longest streets in the whole city of Los Angeles because Pico was important.
Exactly.
And, Figueroa was important, Alvarado was important.
So,
anyways, that's part of our campaign, as we talked about last week, is about reminding people about the history of California, and there's a whole lot than just simply Americans showed up and they sort of overwhelmed the Mexicans. In fact, the original government of California was bilingual. The original constitution of the quote unquote state was actually in both Spanish and English.
Right. Owen mentioned that too just a few shows ago.
Yeah, and all these things were done because California was multicultural and everybody knew it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody knew that the only way to have peace was to be inclusive of all the various peoples who were populating California. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, was then, of course, under its easily the greatest period of change it ever experienced was, of course, during the gold rush. Mm-hmm. I was reading. Just as an aside, it's fascinating. If you go where the Transamerica Town is, for instance, the Transamerica Tower in San Francisco, mm-hmm. You're basically in a gulch that used to be called Chile Town. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's because there were thousands of people from Chile who came during the gold rush. We don't even think about those people. But they all came because, of course, their country was actually closer than the eastern United States to the gold fields. And so, because again, there was no Panama Canal and there was no transcontinental railroad. And so the only way it took over about 60-some days, maybe 2 weeks, I mean 2 months, and maybe your life to get from New York to California. Wow. But anyways, Chile and of course China. Those are the countries that contributed a great number of people to California. One other thing I discovered, again, it's another one. We haven't practiced this one. Do you happen to know why sourdough bread is identified with California?
I think I used to. You want to remind us?
It's because of the French immigrants.
Oh.
During the gold rush, a whole bunch of people came from France. And they brought their wives with them, and their wives happened to have to bring the French style of bread, and particularly the French kind of yeast. Mm-hmm. So they brought sourdough, mm-hmm. And of course the hungry miners were prepared to eat about anything. Mm-hmm. So they bought this bread, and of course Boudin's SF. I mean, right now to this day, right? But you all know, you go to any restaurant in California, chances are sourdough bread is on the menu. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it all has to do with the French influence on California. Mm-hmm. No other part of the United States probably has more French influence except for the upper Midwest. Mm-hmm. When you think about it. So it's just awesome, I think. Well, of course, in Louisiana. And that's a big piece of California. That's one of the things I've more and more we study this stuff, So many things that people overlook because, they just we think of them as American, mm-hmm. but in fact they're distinctly Californian. So anyways, we talked about Bernardo Ruiz de Rodriguez, and let's talk about the women's suffrage movement. Again, mm-hmm. That's exciting because of the women who, that's exciting because, you had progressive women, rather small population, and like this across the West, rather small. Well, California was by that time, pretty settled, if you will, right, with a pretty even population, especially San Francisco, which was one of the major cities mm-hmm. In the Union, in the United States at that time. And, a strong voice in government. Remember, out east, it took 6 years after California gave women the vote for New York to get women to vote. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Connecticut did very late. Mm-hmm. No, they didn't. None of those states ever gave women the vote. They ratified. I think that most of them ratified the. No, I'm sorry. That's a little bit of thing in my head. That's right. No state south of Pennsylvania on south. None of those states ever passed the 19th Amendment.
Right.
It was strictly a northern thing and a western thing. And that's particularly because those areas were actually more hostile. I mean, today we think of Massachusetts as being this liberal hotbed, where you think something like women's suffrage would just be as popular as, you know, as LGBT rights today.